Rachel here. Welcome to my Slow TV Stitchery. Well, good morning everybody. I think you'll be able to see that I've made progress from last week. It's an odd thing about small stitches like this, that it can seem very, very slow when you're stitching it, while at the same time seeming impossibly quick when you look back at what you've done. I don't quite understand why this should be, but to be honest, when you're trying to make progress, it's something to be delighting in rather than complaining about. I have ended up with some vaguely appropriate reading at the moment as well. I'm reading The King in the North by Max Adams, which is about King Oswald of Northumbria and the times in which he lived, so it was necessary to consider the political dynamics, shall we say, of the period leading up to Oswald's rule. And I don't know what I got from the book last time I read it, apart from sheer delight because Max Adams can write. But this time what I'm picking up is just how much movement there was in post-Roman Britain. You tend to think of everybody as being stuck in place, apart from the invaders. But now people think that the invaders didn't really, or not in anything like the quantities that we used to believe, that I was told when I was a kid. But in actual fact, reading that and Alfred's Britain, also by Max Adams, and I think of Wessex as being well to the south of here, and I was never clear where Mercia was, but it wasn't until I read one of those that I realised that the Mercians actually at one point re-fortified Chester, or that Oswald, who was King of Northumbria, died at, well, the clue is in the name apparently, Oswestry. Bits of him were hung on a tree, which is rather gruesomely the source of the name, Oswald's Tree. And he was King of Northumbria, and he was based at Banbury. So they moved around. Far more than, well, certainly more than I realised when I was a kid. Not that we had very much about what was then called the Dark Ages. I have vague memories from middle school of an educational film, or at least it must have been, it was clearly within an educational setting, but there was a bit of black and white, and I think there was a reenactment of Canute's adventure with the waves, but there was also some invaders coming into a house and being about to put out someone's eyes. Thank you for the nightmares, guys. That's 40 years ago that I saw that, and I haven't forgotten it yet. Sometimes I wish educators paid a little bit more attention to the nightmares they themselves got from school, because I don't believe for a moment that they didn't. Anyway, I have been delighting in Max Adams' writing, reading bits aloud to the Australian, who looks at me a bit quizzically because it's well outside of his area of interest. Now then, I'm realising, looking at this, and quite apart from, I'm going to have to, there we are, that's improved things. I'm going to have to work something out for the clouds here, because it looks as though the clouds are missing the bits of ruin, which is not at all the impression I want to give. But at the same time, what's a girl to do? Oh well, we shall. It's clearly not going to have clouds this low. I think I've decided that would be a pity. I know I have here. I'm going to fray those clouds with some more blue stitching at a later date. It's a constant surprise, actually, when you were brought up to think of post-Roman Britain as An age of inconvenience, as a certain gentleman put it. To find that inconvenient by our standards it may have been, but it wasn't at the back of beyond. And that there were Northumbrian and Irish clerics and historians popping up all over Europe, in fact, and that what we think of as a sea being a division was actually the superhighway of its time. I recall a time team in which Mick Aston, of happy memory, was demonstrating this to Tony Robinson in his character as proxy for the viewer, and they'd put the known trade routes on a map, and even when you knew what you were going to see, it was surprising how central some very out of the way places these days turned out to be. Max Adams suggests that a lot of the Roman roads were still very much in use, and furthermore they dictated where battles happened, because apparently if you look at battle sites, a surprising number of them are just off one of the old Roman roads, which is an interesting thought. And then you think about it and consider that even if the armies weren't the size they are today, what is it that slows an army down? It's logistics. It's getting stuck in mud, literally. It's having the baggage train bogged down and not able to move fast. And in Alfred's Britain, Max Adams has produced a couple of maps which are a bit like the London Tube map, which show the Roman roads and the sea routes and the rivers which were navigable, to the points at which they were navigable, so that you get a sense of what connections might have been possible, what connections were made. Now I'm going to put an extra couple of stitches there. Just to help this. I would have made my life very much easier here if I had planned out a sky beforehand, This is one of those occasions on which my, shall we say, somewhat improvisatory attitude has definitely slowed me down. And I agree, you could say, well, why don't you work out something for the last few bits? And frankly, it might be a good idea, except I would be slightly afraid of then losing the style, or whatever style I've created here. So I'm not quite sure what to do except just carry on and make a mental note that next time I want to do a sky and canvas work, I should at least work out where I want the clouds to be. persist in confusing myself, won't I? Not least of the challenges of this is it's very similar in some ways to the family group, in that I end up with loads of needles all going at once. And I don't see any way of making that any more manageable than I have. So obviously it's just the way it goes. I'm very pleased that these raised stitches haven't been too much brought down by my stitching the sky behind them. They are slightly dropped, but not much, and nothing that isn't puffed up slightly with a bit of a tug. That's good. That's all for this session. I hope you enjoyed following along. Happy stitching!